Okay, this is going to be a little mini video on multiplying binomials and then factoring trinomials. Well, before you actually start factoring, you do have to have a good sense on how to multiply binomials together, as some of the methods that you use in order to multiply them, you can reverse when you try and factor. So let's quickly understand how multiplying works. Multiplying binomials is easiest done through a method called FOILing. FOILing stands for first, outer, inner, last. So the way that this works is that you have to multiply your terms together in a specific order so that you can combine the like terms and thus get a result that gives you an equation. So we're starting from two, I like to call them mini terms, but they're binomials. Binomial means a two-termed equation. And we have to multiply those together in order to get something new. Okay? So we're going to do just that. So FOIL stands for first, outer, inner, last. First means the first two terms in each year binomials. So we are going to multiply these two terms together, thus giving us A times C as your first term. Okay. We then have to add that to your next term. So we are going to add this here to the next term. O stands for outer. It stands for the outermost terms of your equation. So we are looking at this one and this one. So we are going to add this to the term A times D. We need to add this to the next term in the row. I stands for inner. It is your inner two most terms. I like to think of it as they are the ones that are right next to each other but belong in different binomials. So here this is going to be the term B times C. And then we need to add this to the last term in the bunch. And so this is going to be your last two terms. So just like with your first, you added the first two terms in your parentheses. Well, here we're going to multiply these last two terms. So we have these two here, which is going to give us B times D. Now the other thing that we need to note, or that you would keep in mind about all of these terms, is that they each are going to reduce down to different parts of your equation. So here this first term is going to be your squared term. Your middle term here, so this one right here, is actually going to combine, and it's going to be your single variable term. Your last term, so this one right here, is going to give you a number. In other words, it is a constant. Okay. So when we multiply them all out, the last thing you always have to do is you have to simplify, which is combining those middle two terms together so that you get what's called a trinomial. Now, a trinomial is a three-termed equation. So it's an equation that has three components to it. So binomial means two, trinomial means three. So let's look at this example and see how we do. So it says that we have to multiply and simplify. So again, we are going to do first, outer, inner, last. So let's take a look at what that looks like. So first, again, is your first two terms combined together. Okay. So this would be my 3y and my y. So this makes up my first. So I'm going to have 3y times my y. I have to add that to my next terms, the next term in the sequence being outer. So FOO is outer. My outermost terms are going to be the ones that are on the ends. So it's going to be my 3y and the 9. So I'm looking at these outer two terms here. So this is going to be my 3y and my 9. Okay. Then I have to do my inner terms. So my inner terms are, again, they're the ones that are right next to each other. And with these terms, I want you to notice that my sign on the 8 is negative. So you have to bring that with. So again, we're adding this term onto our sequence. And this becomes negative 8 times 9. Now my last two terms, or the L part, again, is the last terms that show up in your binomials. So we're going to add that to the back of our sequence. And here, this again is going to be negative 8 times 9. So if we look at it, we have F, O, I, L, FOIL, first, outer, inner, last. So let's go ahead and simplify these. So here, in order to simplify them, this first term I have 3y times y. So y times y is y squared times 3 gives me a 3y squared. I am still adding this into my sequence. So I'm adding, and then look at the next ones. I have a 3y times 9. So 3 times 9 is a 27. So this is a 27, and then the y comes along. I am adding this into the next part of my sequence, and I have negative 8 times y. So here this becomes a negative 8y. Okay. I got to add it into the last part of my sequence, and here I have negative 8 times 9, and this becomes a negative 72. So I have to go ahead and I have to simplify things down. So notice there's nothing to combine with my 3y squared. So this is still going to be 3y squared. When I look at the next term, notice I'm adding to a positive, so this becomes plus my 27y, and then I have minus 8y. So this piece right here is the piece that is going to combine. So I have a plus 27y minus 8y is going to give me a plus 19y. And then my last term here, I have a minus 72. So plus a negative gives me a negative 72. And thus that would be the answer that you would have for multiplying your binomials together. So overall, first, outer, inner, last, notice it reduced down to giving you a trinomial. Trinomial means 3 terms. Okay? So your solution would be 3y squared plus 19y minus 72. Okay. So now let's get into some factoring. So we have factoring trinomials using that FOIL idea. So to use that FOIL idea essentially says that what we are looking at is we are looking at breaking your FOILs or your trinomials down directly into its parts. So in general, we have ax squared plus bx plus c. That's in general our equation. And there's a couple things that this equation tells us. First, this back sign tells us your sign multiplication options. To choose from. So what are my options that I have to choose from? Well, those options have to do with when I multiply two numbers together, what do I get? So if I take a positive number and I multiply it by a positive number, I get a positive result. So this back term here is telling you the sign of your factors that when multiplied together need to match the sign of your term. Well, I have other choices than just this one. I also can take a negative number and multiply that by a negative number, and it also will give me a positive result. Last, if I take a positive number and multiply it by a negative number, I get a negative result. So I only have these three different combinations that I can actually choose from in order to set up my factors. Well, that being said, or that being understood, we also have this other sign. The sign of my b term is going to tell me which sign option you must use. Okay. So, for example, the back term is positive, says I have these two results to choose from. Positive, positive gave me a positive, or negative, negative to give me the positive. Since my middle term here is positive, it tells me I have to set my factors up using the top example here, where both factors would be positive. So it's going to dictate what's happening in your factors. Okay? And that's essentially how you're breaking down your trinomial. Now the other thing that we have to keep in mind is we have to keep in mind how these factors are actually going to break into their parts. So we do that by looking then at the actual terms you have in your equation. So again, we have ax squared plus bx plus c. And we've got a couple pieces of information that we need to know. First, my c term is going to give me the factor options to pick from. What this means is that you want to create a factor tree of all possibilities. Okay. So in other words, you're looking for your factors, meaning two numbers that will multiply together and give you c. So we are looking for two numbers that multiply to give the c value. Okay, that's essentially what we're doing. Now the other thing that we have is we have our b term. So this b term here, okay, is going to tell you which factor option to use. In other words, you are looking for a factor combination that adds together to the b value. Okay? And so that's kind of how you are going to break down your trinomials looking at your FOIL idea. So let's actually look at an example here that is going to walk us through how we apply that idea. So the first thing that we need to do is we need to figure out the signs needed. And the reason this idea works is because my a term is a 1. Okay? If your a is greater than 1, then do not use this method. Alright? But here my a term is 1, so we can go ahead and do it this way. So first I need to figure out the sign that's needed. So remember, I have 3 possibilities. Positive times positive gives you a positive result. Then I have negative times negative gives you a positive result. And I have positive times negative gives you a negative result. Okay? So what you need to remember is you need to remember that the back sign, okay, so this sign here is going to tell me which sign option to choose from. Well, in this case, my back sign is negative. So if you look at all my combinations here, the only combination that I have in this case is going to be my bottom one, which says that I have positive times negative being a negative. Okay? So what does this actually mean? Well, this means that I can set up the first part of my factors. So I know that I have my factors that are going to be set up where I'm creating my binomials. And I also know my x is going to break into x and x because it's an x squared. Well, what that back sign tells me is that I have one positive and I have one negative. Okay, so that's where I'm at so far. Now, the second thing that I have to figure out, okay, so the second thing that you have to know is we need to find factors of the c value. Okay. So this is where we're going to do the factor tree. The factor tree says I'm starting with my c, and in this case c is negative 36, and I'm going to look at their factors. Okay, so I'm just simply looking at the numbers. I'm not looking at the signs yet because we have a trick for that, but I'm just looking at the numbers. So I have 1 and 36, I have 2 and 18, I have 3 and 12, 4 and 9, 6 and 6. Okay. Now, for this particular example, or for this particular combination, when you have a negative in the back here, because that means I have one positive, one negative, here's the trick. Okay, so your sign trick is as follows. If b is negative, then the bigger factor is negative. Okay. However, if b is positive, then the bigger factor is positive. So in this case, my b value here is a -5. So I'm going to use the trick that since my b is negative, the bigger factor has to be negative. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and input that trick into my factor tree. So I know all of my smaller factors are going to be positive numbers, and all of my bigger factors would be negative numbers. So now what I want to do is I want to look at which combination of these, when added together, is going to give me a -5. And in this situation, we only have one factor that's going to make that happen. And so that factor here is going to be this one here. It's going to be 4 and 9. That when we add those together, we get -5. So therefore, we now have solved our problem. So once you figure out which factors to use, you just simply have to plug them in. So remember, we started with x and x. We then had input our signs to be one positive and one negative. And now we are using the idea that since the bigger factor has to be negative, that I have a +4 and a -9. Now if I were to FOIL these back out together, you should get exactly what you started with. And that is a quick and dirty how to factor an equation using your FOIL ideas. Now the other method that we have at our disposal that we can use fairly often is we can use what's called the AC method, or as I like to call it, bottoms up. Bottoms up, or the AC method, has quite a few steps that need to be followed in order to make this method successful. So for those steps, we have to look at a couple key ideas, and those ideas are going to include the method of which we have to approach the problem. So the AC method says, first and foremost, we are going to multiply A times C together. My second step says that you now need to find all factors of that AC number, and you're looking for the combination that is going to add to the B value. Okay. The third thing that you have to do is you have to do what's called set up your factor. And to set up the factor says you want to put it in the following form. You're going to have x, or whatever variable you're using, and then the form is plus or minus, because at this moment in time we don't know if it's plus or minus, but it could be either. And you're setting up a fraction, and that fraction is going to be whatever that factor was, and you have to divide it by your A value. So you are going to set up both factors in this same method. Once you've set them up, your fourth step is you have to reduce the fraction all the way down, so simplify as far as it can go. And then your last step is you are going to do what I like to call bottoms up. So bottoms up says I have my factor that's in the method x plus or minus, and I've reduced it to where it's factor over my a term. And bottoms up says I'm going to take this bottom value and I'm going to shift it up to become the coefficient to my x term. And thus you've found your factors. Okay? So that is the bottoms up method that you need to follow. Okay? So let's go ahead and look at an example. So we have factor the following: 12x squared minus 31x plus 20. So again, I have to be able to set up the AC method, and just like with the previous factor, we need to make sure that we have the right signs being used. So again, we are going to look at this first plus is going to tell us your sign choices. My sign here is positive, so that means I'm working for positive times positive gives me a positive result, or negative times negative gives me a positive result. And then this middle option is going to tell me which choice to use. So here my middle option is negative, so that automatically tells me that I have to use this bottom option where I have negative times negative. So that is what my factors are going to be set up as. So I have to look at my first step. So my first step here is that I need to multiply a times c. So step 1 says that I have to multiply a times c. So in this instance, my a is 12, my c is 20. So when I multiply those, I get 240 as a result. My second step says that I have to find factors of my 240 that add to negative 31, because that's my b term, negative 31. So I'm going to look at my 240 in terms of its factor tree. Now you could list out all the factors if you wanted. So for example, we know that there's 1 in 240, blah blah blah, you know, all the way down. And we're going to get to 15 and 16, and when we combine those we get 31. Now the other thing we know about it is we know what my factors are supposed to be. Both of them are supposed to be negative. Okay? So however much you have to list is completely up to you. It's just what you need in order to answer the problem. So we are looking for the two factors, and so these are going to be it. This is what we need to use. Okay. So that third step says you need to set up your factors. And remember that factor form is going to be x. Here my signs are negative, so this is going to be minus. And then the form says we're going to do factor over the a term. Okay, so that is the form that we're setting up. So here I'm going to set up my two binomials. I know I have x, and then both signs were negative. And I found my factors to be 15 and 16. And then my a term was 12. So this is over 12 and over 12. Okay. The next thing you have to do is you have to reduce. And we're going to reduce the fractions. So when we look at that, 15 over 4, or 15 over 12, what's in common there is a 3. So this is going to become x minus, if you divide 3 out of both, you get a 5 over 4. And on the other one, what's common here is going to be a 4. So my second factor is going to be x minus, and then I'm going to have a 4 over 3. And then that last and final step is your bottoms up step. So if you remember, the bottoms up step says you have your x over your fraction, and our which was factor over a, and it says that you have to take this a part, or the denominator part, and you're going to pair it up with the x term. Okay? So here in our equations, this 4 is going to shift up and pair with the x, and my 3 is going to shift up to pair with the x, thus giving me the overall result of 4x minus 5 times 3x minus 4. And that is your bottoms up method in a snapshot. Okay? So if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Otherwise, it's been fun, and see you next time.